All right. Well, Kyle, thanks again for joining me today on the Camera Brown Show. I know it's been a little while since the last time we talked, but I appreciate you hopping on to tell more of your story. And as mentioned, I'm going to go ahead and jump right into and kind of go through your bio, and then we'll start the podcast. But Kyle Clements is the founder and CEO of Quipli, a provider of modern software for independent equipment rental companies. Kyle has a decade of software startup experience and has been part of several successful ventures that have become publicly traded or been privately acquired, such as Uber and Clutch Technologies. In the past few years, Kyle has completed thousands of customer interviews, understanding needs and trends in the growing equipment rental market. Kyle brings a unique perspective to the equipment rental industry and is passionate about partnering with independent equipment rental companies to run their operations more effectively and assist them in creating an impactful experience for their customers. So thanks for hopping on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. You missed one point. I'm also, maybe more importantly, I'm your my wife is your cousin, right?
We
So
also, yes, that is correct. Your wife is my cousin, so we're definitely family.
yeah, that should be the top of the bio, I guess.
Yes, this is a family member of mine, and he also is a total badass in the startup space. So there you go.
Right over.
I love it. So yeah, so thanks for hopping on. I'm really looking forward to diving into this, and kind of as mentioned, really want to kind of better understand Quipli as a company, so that we can get around to why you started Quipli in the first place, and then from there we'll dive into a number of other topics. But if you wouldn't mind, just to start things off, why did you start Quipli, and how are things going?
Yeah, well, things are going good. We're still here. 91% of software companies don't last 3 years. 94% don't get to a million in revenue. So we've crossed those thresholds almost 4.5 years in. So the fact that we're having this conversation, in some sense, from the minority that we're still here. I think my background, I started companies when I was little. I had a paper route, cutting grass for our neighbors, and sort of got the entrepreneurial bug and started my first company after Clements before UVA for grad school. And I was taking old kayaks and recycling them into dog collars and wallets, built an e-commerce store. And the company lasted 9 months and ran out of money. But I loved the experience. And I loved the process of creating and building something that added value to people. And at grad school and business school, I had consulting offer and you can work in the finance field. And I didn't personally, for me, feel a lot of meaning in that. So after finishing grad school, ended up taking a job with a Series B startup in Charleston called Zuby. Was there for a year and a half. The startup went totally sideways and learned a lot about what not to do in a startup. But this whole journey along the way, I sort of knew I wanted to start a software company, but wanted to spend a lot of time learning how to build one, right? So I worked at Zuby. I spent the next 4 years working at Clutch, which is a vehicle subscription service. So I was the first product manager there building the software. So rather than buying or leasing a car, you could subscribe to a fleet of cars and swap in and out.
Right.
And really successful story, a lot of fun. We ended up being acquired by Cox Automotive. After that, I left to work at Uber for a year and a half on their pricing team and got to see what a more established, big, successful company, right? And I was there right before the IPO and saw that experience. And ultimately, like I still felt hunger to be in the startup phase and running one myself. So that was about 10 years of doing all of that. And started working with an investor, a venture studio who was very interested in the rental space. And I, did hundreds of rental company interviews in the summer or fall of 2020. And what I found was there wasn't a lot of great software. And people would say, "Oh, I'm sort of happy, but 1 to 10, 6, 7." In particular, like the thing that I found was if you go to these rental companies' websites, nobody was doing e-commerce, which Amazon's been around for decades. And when COVID was happening, everything went fully online. You order your phone, or order your coffee on your phone. You can order everything on your phone, right? You can buy a car now on your phone, but you couldn't rent equipment, right? So what we started doing was initially then building e-commerce websites for rental companies. We had 2 customers with us before we had even really built the whole product. They launched with us. We got 5 customers, 10 customers. And then by that time, the question was, the online renting is great, but can you build the full rental system? I just want one software to run my entire business. And that's when we really started to accelerate as a company. Then we built the back end system, et cetera, which is where we are now. We have hundreds of rental companies, US, Canada, Australia, every state in the country, processing hundreds of thousands of rental transactions today. But the journey all along to how we got here was a combination of 2 things. One, I love building things, and that was in my DNA. And I'm probably going to do another company after Quipli one day, 10, 20 years. And then coming along with like an opportunity in the market, right? We're not a nonprofit. We're here to build a business, not just a product. And this particular market, the equipment rental market, it's a $60 billion market in the United States, growing 5 to 10% annually. About 10,000 rental companies in the US. So it's a decent sized market, but it's generally underserved from a technology perspective. So that's the second piece, is finding the opportunity. And we found that wedge around websites, online renting, sort of get in the market. And we've since been building from there. So maybe it's a long answer, but that's how we got started, at least.
That's a great answer. Exactly what I was expecting to. I mean, there's a long road to get to where you are now, right? And I think a lot of people see the success, but they don't see the work that was put into it along the way. You mentioned doing 100 or so, couple hundred interviews of different rental companies before then getting to actually like starting to build out, well, even just the e-commerce platforms before then building out the actual software. So there's a lot of work that went on the front end of doing that. And I don't know that many people, including myself, fully understand the research aspect of it that is totally necessary to really go into the right space and to really find the problem. Whereas for myself, I think in trying to start things and working through different businesses, I'll identify a problem and kind of jump right into it. Instead, it seems like you took the heavy due diligence route in order to make sure it was a problem before then actually diving in and building out something. So can you walk through that specifically and why you took that road and that route instead of once again maybe just doing like 10 or so and then be like, yeah, this is a problem, let's go solve it, let's go build the solution.
Yeah. I mean, on the timing stuff, by the way, my dad always says 10 years of all-nighters being overnight success. I still think we're 4 or 5 years into our 10-year journey. So in many ways, just getting started still. I really think we're just getting started. But early on, I didn't know anything about the rental industry. And we're going to post this on our podcast, Rental Roundtable, which I'm the host of. And I often feel like I'm the least qualified person to have a Rental Roundtable podcast for the rental industry, and also the least qualified person to run a rental software business because I'm not from the industry. But because of that, I ended up being very curious. Like, there's almost no such thing as a dumb question. Like, hey, why do you do it this way? You start asking those questions, and well, it's been done that way for 30 years because software was on servers and they didn't have access to all this data. So for me, it was just a curiosity, like talking to customers, talking to groups, cold calling them, asking them what their problems were. I think the thing that really flipped, though, is when you start asking people for money. Because everyone will say, oh, that's a problem. Yeah, I'd love to rent online. I'd love to do this. Okay, will you pay me for it? No. Right. So really quickly, I think even within 2 months of me doing this, we started building mock-ups and said, hey, here's the product. Here's how much it costs. We can launch you in 90 days. And we scoped it to a point that we could actually deliver it. And we had two customers sign a contract, pay us money before we had even built any software. We hadn't written a single line of code, right? And then we scrambled to build it. But I think the process of asking people, will you buy this? The idea is like a painted door test. And people, you can do it online where you could put a price in a product. You can see click-through rate. You kind of see, are people willing to pay for it? That was the key, though, because I think early on, like, you start talking, and I looked at some other markets too, like veterinary software. I looked at hotel management software, but you really have to ask people, will you pay for this? And that is where you find out if it's a good idea or not. So that was the key early on, is asking people, okay, do you want to buy it?
Absolutely. So after doing that, was it kind of a qualification for the investor as well? Did he want to see that kind of upfront work being done, or did you do that before going and finding the investor?
Yeah, I mean, for me, at that point we were, I think my wife was pregnant, we were having a kid, and, COVID happened, and it was sort of a fearful time. We had a
Yeah.
mortgage. I wasn't in position to fund this myself. So we worked with an investor from day zero who's been awesome. I think it's another important part is finding good partners through the ups and downs. But I had to show progress. It wasn't a blank check. It was sort of milestones, right? One of the milestones was getting to 25K in revenue,
Right.
getting your first 5 customers signed, right? So that sort of pressure sort of was tough, but it also forced a lot of conversations that need to happen with customers. Like when, I easily could have gone 18 months and built something and maybe find out it was the wrong thing. But I mean, it's sort of crazy, 60 days in to have 2 customers pay you thousands of dollars for something that doesn't exist yet. Like, when you can get to that point, you have found a pain point, right?
The ultimate confidence too. I mean,
Exactly. A lot of
it's
it's finding the right
insane.
the right problem, right? And that, like,
Yeah.
we found a problem pretty quickly. And when we launched the software, it was pretty terrible. Like, the first year was really bad, but people kept paying us, right? So that showed me that, okay, if we stuck on this long enough and got the right team, we could build it the right way. It's going to be amazing business. But early on, it was like a really rough, bad product that people still paid for. And I was like, okay, well, there's probably something here.
Right. I mean, getting to the COVID year specifically with a child, another child, I guess, on the way at some point, obviously in the future of that story. But thinking about paying your mortgage and kind of progressing into that next stage, I think we talked about this before, but the startup that I joined when I came back from Boston to Charleston, we also made basically zero sales for the first 6 months, right? So there was a question mark there of like, okay, is this thing actually going to work? Thankfully, that ended up doing well after 3 years. I left that, but in particular, in your first kind of 60 days, you took on 2 clients. What was that roller coaster ride like though during the first 60 days of getting to those 2 clients? And what maybe has kept you going to this point to obviously continue growing the company to now hundreds of locations?
Yeah, I will say it has. I'm not working any less, and the stress isn't less, but things happen a lot faster and better, which is nice. I think if I didn't have responsibility, I think the responsibility kept me going. I had a responsibility to our investors who had given me the money. I had a responsibility to my family to keep providing for them, for our employees who followed me into this, for our customers who took a risk, and I took that very seriously because there were, I don't know. You could ask Boo, my wife,
Yeah.
your cousin. Probably over 100 times I didn't want to keep doing this. Like just really, really hard. Like really hard. And everyone talks about starting companies really hard. And we've been a lowercase s successful company because we're still here. It was just really hard. I think what kept going me was just like the sense of duty, the sense that like, as I talked about earlier, this like gives me a lot of purpose going back 10, 15 years ago. Like this is sort of what I feel called to do. This is like what gets me out of bed in the morning. Uh, Really hard though. I mean, so we started working on this in August 2020, April 2021. We did a baby moon trip to Hawaii, and I told Boo, I feel like the whole world is in black and white. I felt like depressed because like COVID was happening. I was, think about at that point, I had 4 customers, but I had probably talked to 400 and I got shut down 396 times. The software didn't work, didn't have any revenue. It was just it was brutal. And I honestly think the only reason we're still here today is that we just kept going. I don't think we're any smarter than anyone. I don't think we're working any harder. I think it's just the consistency over a long time. And that's why I think, okay, can we do this level of effort over 10 years? I think you're going to be a really great company because most people don't last. They run out of money, they give up. I think Boo was a huge part of this, keeping me going, but it was hard, still is hard. But I do think it's getting easier. And I think the sense of purpose I have now of like, we'll have hundreds of thousands of people will use our system this year. Like, well, there's a responsibility to do the right thing for them. So that's what keeps me going because it's still hard. But those early days, I don't know. I don't know if I have the stomach to do that again.
Well, I could argue that if you have a Brown on your side, then you're going to be successful. But that's
Right.
a little bit biased on
Who
my
is
end.
really the CEO? She's the one. I mean, I'm telling you, she keeps me going. I mean, it's always hard, but those first 18 months, you really got to have a lot of faith and you got to have a good support system because there are 100 reasons every day why it's not going to work and you got to keep going, right?
Right. Well, this kind of goes back to it as well, and we already talked about this a little bit, but doing the due diligence and the research on the front end. I mean, once you're 4 years into it, you're like, wow, I have a bad idea. If you're 4 years into it, it feels like 4 years of wasted time. But you knew on the front end you had a problem you could solve as long as you built the right tools, built the right team, and presented it to the market properly. So I think that in of itself, and just kind of go, do that over and over again. But it is true that if you are not actually solving a problem that people have, then you probably need to not like be doing that business anymore. You probably should move away from it. But considering you did the upfront work to figure out and find it as a problem to then provide a solution, it's probably a little bit reassuring at this point to know that you were solving a problem that there actually was instead of something that you made up in your mind over that time.
Exactly. And I think that's why you got to ask people for money because people won't pay you consistently for a problem they don't have. They may get one or two. And I've seen friends who've done companies that haven't lasted. And well, I think it's almost this weird thing where you're uncomfortable to ask for money. And I've never been in sales. I was an engineering person. So like I'm now comfortable with it, but it felt very uncomfortable. But you have to put yourself out there and you have to ask people to pay for it because if you're not going to pay, they're not going to pay for it. It's not actually solving a problem. And I think people will say things that are different than what they actually do. So that's the other thing is
Right.
like you have to like really see, are they paying for it? Are they using the software, right? They'll say it's great or not great. Everyone I talk to, what a great idea. Okay, do you want to buy it? And the answer is no. Well, you haven't actually found the problem yet. So I think that was the sort of way to shortcut a lot of these learnings.
So now at this point in the journey, you've obviously built a much better product. You've got a great team around you. You're at a couple hundred however many locations it is now at this point across the country and in Canada. Um, what does it feel like now? I know there's still stress. You mentioned that earlier, but in order to get to that next phase, how are you preparing yourself mentally to continue scaling this thing and taking it to the next level?
Well, I think the mental part is so important, especially as the leader. Like we have 19 people now, and I think it all starts with the leader, right? The leader's not in a good headspace. It's not good for anyone. And I think that's why Boo's been so important. I've seen different points in my life, a therapist or counselor, for, family. My mom passed away 5 years ago, or processing that. And some of it's Quipli related. Like, how do I, wake up in a place of abundance, not a place of fear? And I think the mental aspect is so important. I read another book I read, The Champion's Mindset, and you wake up like, hey, how do we go for gold? We're not playing for silver or bronze. Like, what does it actually look like to plan and expect to win? And that is what we're trying to do. Like, we want to be the leader for, in the US and Canadian equipment rental market. That's what we're trying to build. And that's not going to happen today, right? That's why I'm saying it's a 10-year journey. But it took a long time, and I still struggle with this, but getting to that point of like belief and confidence that like, hey, we're going to do this, right? It's going to be hard, and we're going to have ups and downs, and good days and bad days. But I think just getting to a point where I actually believe in this, and
Right.
it's not based on like false confidence. It's the competence of like seeing the product work for hundreds of thousands of people, right? At this point, right? And tens of millions of dollars every month through the system. Like seeing that gives me that confidence. But early on, like you had to have a vision. And a lot of it was just sitting down and like honestly meditating and visioning, like, I had a map in my mind. We had at one point, we had one customer, right? But I visualized what would it look like to have hundreds of rental companies all over the globe using Quipli, and then actually like believing that. That's what sort of has driven me, and I think that's sort of been harder for me to get to, is that confidence that like, hey, you actually can do this. You're the right person for this. Like you're not a fraud. And you're not no one's going to find you out. And I think that is something I still struggle with, imposter syndrome, and it gets better over time. But like that was probably the thing that probably held me back the most, was actually confidence side of believing that you can do it, because the odds are against you. And I think, Boost help with that, and friends have helped with that. But I think the confidence is so important in this.
What I found, and even just doing this podcast and having more conversations with friends of mine, especially men, a lot of men struggle to talk about therapy and going and talking to somebody and having those conversations openly. A lot of guys struggle with like that vulnerability aspect of life, and really opening up, especially when you are in need. So when it comes to like going through that over the years as well, and finding your fit, finding the right person to go talk to, family, therapist, etc. But from a mental health perspective, how would you maybe suggest that individuals, men specifically building businesses, but men and women, go about it from a mental health perspective? Talking to family first, talking to a mental health therapy, a therapist or a specialist first. Where would you kind of start if you were a business entrepreneur or somebody building something and just frankly struggling mentally at that time?
Yeah. And I would even say, even if you're not struggling mentally, it's sort of like an oil change. I think everybody should see a therapist or counselor at some point in your life. It doesn't have to be every day, every week, but like, it's so important. I think for me, one thing I'm excited about, we're going to announce tomorrow with our employees, like we're going to offer part of our health insurance. We have a program that everybody gets 12 free mental health counseling visits per year, included in our service as an equivalent employee. We're going to tell everyone tomorrow. So by the time they listen to this, if they do, it's already be out there. So
Yeah.
that's something I'm proud of as a business owner, that we're going to offer our employees. I'm going to say, look, I don't care if you go or not, but I think everyone should consider it, right? I think for me, that's how I got into this. Uber offered that as a benefit, and my mom was, had brain cancer, and I was like, well, I'm sort of a mess. Let me go to this, right, and sort of help with the grieving process. That's what was the trigger for me. A lot of times, it's usually like, unfortunately, a catastrophic event that pushes people to therapy. But if you're, even if it doesn't have to be that, right? What I've learned since then is like, the person I've been seeing now for off and on for like 4 or 5 years, he helps me. Hey, like I'm struggling with confidence. I'm struggling with this sort of board member. How do I deal with this? I'm struggling with thinking about these things that aren't life or death situations, that it becomes much more normal. So there's definitely a stigma to counseling and therapy, like the only bad people or broken people go. I think it's the healthy people who go. And it's so important. It's changed. I think a lot of the success Quipley's had is honestly through the Boo, and also my therapist I've seen, who's really helped me believe that like, no, Kyle, you're the fucking man. You can do this, right? Like you're the guy to do this. And I think just working through that sort of unblocked a lot of things in my brain. So, I mean, it's been transformational for me. Like I'm a different person because of it. And I'm excited that all Quipli employees will be able to participate, but I think everyone should consider it. And, how do you find that person? I mean, I would ask friends to, that's the part. It's like I think referrals are worth their weight in gold, and there's you can Google online, et cetera. But I usually find that like references or people who recommendations, you're the best way to find the right therapist for you because it's all about really around fit.
Right. Um, outside of, so I guess we on the Quipli front first and foremost, just to kind of not even wrap up Quipli, but to talk to Quipli and make sure that we've covered everything on that front. You got the rental roundtable, and obviously you built a team of 19. But on the Quipli front, can you just kind of go through and tell us, a little bit more about kind of where you're at as a company now, and what you're doing to progress it, right? Now, I talked about scalability a little bit earlier, but you're now doing the Rental Roundtable. You have 30 podcast episodes going there and continuing to grow. But what are you maybe doing now to get yourself to that next level as a company?
Yeah, that's a good question. The thought I read another book, Clear Thinking. It's really good if you want. That's another good one. But
Okay.
he said that the thought was if you owned 100% of this company and you were going to hold it for 100 years, what decisions would you be making? And like really resets like I think not so much for us right now, but like the quarterly, the monthly rat race, and hit your monthly number, hit your monthly quota,
Right.
and you end up taking shortcuts is what happens that are suboptimal to doing the right thing over a long period of time. Because I think no matter what the market's doing, your competitors are doing, if you do the right thing consistently over the long period of time, you're going to beat 90% of people because I think 90% of people won't even do that. You know, Warren Buffett says his number one rule of investing is don't lose money. Rule two, see rule number one, right? So it's really just around like doing the right thing patiently, consistently. So for us right now, we've brought on, we started with some international contractors on the engineering side. In the last few years, we've switched to full-time US based people. All 19 are US, and they're expensive and they're good, but we're really investing in the product because I think long term, what really matters is building like the best product in the industry. We've great salespeople and marketing, and the podcast helps on the marketing side. And there's like little tactics you can do to like sort of shortcut and maybe juice your sales numbers for a month or two. And I think early on we were doing those things because we were trying to show to our investors like keep giving us money. But now we're at a point where we can sustain ourselves, and then it's like okay, asking that question, what do we want to be doing in 100 years? Like, well, we would be investing, finding the best engineers that we can find, and building the best product we can do. And that's not going to show up today or tomorrow, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we're going to be the established group that people want to work with. And if you talk to our customers, we're talking to one today, they want to be our partner for 5 to 10 years. It's a huge pain to switch rental softwares because we're a system of record. And if you don't, I just think there's like a lot, there's an element of like for the business we're building, people want to know that you're going to be around
Right.
and you're going to be doing the right thing for a long time. And so that's what I've been thinking about is like, and part of that's like, on the team side too, not just building a great product, but like as a CEO, I'm trying to build an organization, and the organization ultimately is building the product and building the company, right? That's sort of my job is like building the people here. So it's investing in people with the mental health benefits we're offering now. We're now doing annual compensation reviews for the first time because the first year was just me, right? Now we're at a size of a company that you want to invest in people because I think if you, for us, I sort of think our secret sauce long term is having really, really awesome people, and you got to pay them well, and you got to invest in them, and you got to give them promotions and incentives, um, and those are some of the things I'm thinking about, and that's really changed in the 2 years. So the first 2 years, it was like, can we survive? Like 91% don't make it 3 years, and once you get to that mark and you sort of things start to flip, then you're like, all right, now I can breathe, and let's start doing things the right way, not the fast way, not the cheap way, but the right way. And that's sort of the mindset shift for me this year and going into next year is just calming down and not rushing through things and doing things the right way because that's how you build a great business long term. So those are some of the things I'm trying to think about for the next year or two.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about investing in people and you're thinking about the vision a lot. And I feel like a lot of guys get stuck in, and I did too. I got stuck in the 2 to 3 year mark, which was where we ended up not doing well and kind of failing with the last startup I was working on, where we were like, okay, like we need money. We just need to get our next client. We just need to figure out the next step instead of thinking about the long term and thinking about the vision and really diving into that. But it's super cool to see at this point where you are really thinking about the 10-year, 15-year, 20-year plan of the company. But thinking of that in like, already would you like to be in 100 years is something that I've never even thought about, frankly, because I honestly haven't thought about a company lasting 100 years. And I think that's a huge mental shift of just like surviving to the next day versus what kind of company would I want to be in 100 years. Have you so past the people and kind of where the product is currently? What does have you started to implement? Well, I'll just ask it. Have you started to implement AI into the business, and what does the AI kind of scene look like within rental software currently?
Yeah, we did. As far as my understanding, we were the first rental software to have AI features. It came out in February at the ARA show, American Rental Association show in February 2024. We came out with three very small tactical features. Essentially, a support bot. You can ask questions and respond in real time. Different ways to search for certain equipment because like a skid steer has 15 different names, like a Bobcat, things like that. So it can automatically pull the right inventory based on what you're searching. And then number three, for all the product websites that we built. We usually have a team of interns writing descriptions on what the equipment does. Well, with an AI ChatGPT bot,
Right.
every time you add a product, it'll automatically write description. That's sort of table stakes stuff. Again, our industry is pretty generally behind the curve on stuff. So that alone was like first to market. I do think in a 5-10 year window, AI is going to be pretty transformational in rental software and in everything in life. Another book I read is called, I'm blanking on it, but it's about essentially this AI expert from MIT. Sort of talks about the next 30 years of AI. And he talks about, I don't know, this is sort of controversial, but in 30 years from now, AI and humans like merge and it's like a new species. He's called, it's something is nearer. I'm gonna look it up here.
Book's not called Singularity, is it?
The singularity is nearer. I think it's
Yeah.
what it is.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, are you looped in on the singularity stuff?
So yeah, I mean, I've watched a lot of YouTube videos, read a lot online about singularity in general. And 30 years seems a little bit distant to me. I think the next 5 to 10 years, especially when you think like Neuralink, right? And like
Yeah.
things that are already available, in mass, maybe 30 years. But frankly, I think we're a little bit closer to that than people expect. Just because
Yeah.
if your friend has a Neuralink and he becomes smarter than you, aren't you going to want a Neuralink to become smarter as well? Like that's not my personal opinion. Like I don't really care to have anything implanted into my brain, but in order to be able to have that level of superiority mentally with and I guess over people, that sounds terrible, but I think a lot of people are gonna want that kind of feature to be kind of like a cyborg of sorts. Sounds
Yeah.
ridiculous, but I think we're
No,
headed
it's
there a
crazy.
lot quicker than we expect.
It's totally changed my view on stuff. This guy, Ray Kurzweil, he wrote a book in 2004, 2005 called The Singularity is Near. And that was
Okay.
19 years ago. And pretty much everything he predicted, he was spot on. So now he's written a second book, well, several books, but a sequel called The Singularity is Nearer, like AKA I was right 20 years ago, and here's the next 20 years.
Yep.
And a lot of his, thinking is like, I don't know if I agree or not, but what he talks about is like essentially humans, you're going to get Neuralink implanted, right? And then eventually AI could start, you know, replacing your cells, fixing your body, et cetera. But what he talks about is like there's a new species of Homo sapien that is a AI bot and a human being. And he's like 30. And I don't even know what that means because like, well, what does that thing have a soul? Like, what's the spirituality of that thing? Like, what are the ethics? What happens if, like, can you kill that thing? Should it vote? What if
Yep.
it wants to get married to someone? It's a lot of like complex questions I'm not smart enough to answer. That's like the 30 years, but like in the meantime, like what technology, like I think the thing that people always miss, and I miss myself, is how quickly things accelerate. It's not a linear curve.
Yep.
Like, it took whatever 1,000 years to get like pen and paper. Then like 500 years later is the printing press. And then it was like all of a sudden, like the accelerations like year by year
Rapid acceleration.
ramping up.
Yeah.
And I'm convinced AI is going to going to be like the biggest technological shift of our lifetime. And I think that means a lot for a lot of different things. So for rental software, there's workflows that we can sort of integrate and automate. And I think over the next few years, we're going to do things like that. Um, so I'm very interested from a pragmatic perspective, but just from a philosophical perspective as well. I'm like, this AI stuff is crazy.
Yeah.
It's like it really is going to change a lot of stuff.
This is a little bit of a shift, but considering you have children and you're asking these questions at your point in life, at your stage in life, you're asking questions about, the kind of the soul searching, consciousness, etc., singularity. Um, how does it make you feel about your children growing up in this era, right? Of technology rapidly progressing faster, frankly, in the next 20 to 30 years than it will have in the past 20 to 30 years. And once again, your children having to grow up in that era.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, you're asking a technology person, and I'm also an optimist. Part of the book, The Singularity is Nearer, he makes the point that maybe people wouldn't agree with, but the world is actually beginning a better place. And it doesn't feel like it because all of a sudden you hear the crime report or right. But that's the short-term thinking. If you look at the long-term trends, which is what I'm sort of like, which I'm starting to think about, like when I'm talking about building Quipli for 100 years. I'm obviously not going to do that, but like the idea, like if you take a long view on anything in life, you're probably going to come out in a pretty good spot. And if you take a long view of like the different technological trends of like even just getting electricity and water and solar energy and all these other things, right? Like the world is generally actually beginning a much better place because of technology. And if you believe that to be true, like why would AI be any different? I think there's an element of, will AI take jobs from people? And I think it actually will, but I think it'll create new jobs. Like podcast host was not a job 50 years ago, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
software CEO was not a job 100 years ago, right? What was a job was a farmer and a welder, and those have sort of been automated, right? So that technology has removed a lot of those jobs, but it's created better jobs for people. So I think that's what is hard is like we're going to see a lot of jobs automated in the next 10 years from AI, but we're not going to know what the new jobs being created are yet, what those are going to be, but they will exist. So, for my kids, I don't know, I'm still hopeful and optimistic. Like there'll be some bad things that come, technology, bad things came with the internet, but there's a lot of good things too. So I'm more hopeful and optimistic that these things will be a positive impact on everyone's lives.
no, I tend to agree with you. And I think it's hard when you get caught up in current events and media and all the BS that you see online, right? It's like it's hard to get away from it and to escape it, which is oftentimes where I find myself just completely shutting it off and turning it off and going outside and walking around and having conversations with humans instead of
Yeah.
doom scrolling, which once again I'm a victim of. And to
Yeah.
a
And I
certain
mean,
degree.
if you look at the news corporations or businesses that exist to make money and they do that, like if the news came out today and was like, hey, global poverty decreased by 0.005% from yesterday, no one's going to read that article, right?
Right,
They will
right,
read is like there's a shooting or the pagers exploded everywhere yesterday, right? And those things are like compelling and
yeah,
and like those headlines, usually negative, draw eyeballs and they draw dollars and that's what drives. But if you take like the longer view and you actually look at what's happening across the globe over a
right.
long term, generally speaking, things have been getting better. And I think if you listen to the news every day, you don't get that story.
Right. Well, I mean, when you're selling, well, a lot of people sell on fear, right? And you're trying to find that fear that they can sell on. Obviously, the mass media has done a really good job of pinpointing those items and selling on it consistently. But when you have wars going on overseas, there's plenty of information for them to discuss, plenty of information to share, especially when you have a heated political debate going on too. You can share plenty of that information as well. So there's a lot of that going on, which I feel like a lot of people need to figure out a way to stay away from in their daily lives. And so when I kind of ask that question about your kids, it's more so like, well, what is it going to look like when your children start asking for cell phones? But maybe the cell phones have like AI in them, or the cell phones are connected to a Neuralink that they then want to get implanted into their brain because their friends all have Neuralinks at that
Yeah.
point. That's it. Once again, those are not that's terrible or not. It just kind of is what it is, and I feel like the future is kind of heading in that direction. So those will be interesting conversations that will be fun to navigate once we get to that point. I'm sure you're not looking forward to those kind of
Yeah, I don't know if
conversations.
it'll be fun to navigate. I think I'm already sort of becoming an old person, it feels like. But like our parents are always like, when social media came out, they were so scared, like, oh, this is ridiculous, it's crazy. But if that same thing's gonna happen to us, but it's gonna be even worse because things are accelerating faster and faster. Like
Correct.
the things that are gonna be happening when they're in high school of tech, like it's going to be uncomfortable. And it's just sort of like, well, it's happening. That's my point on all this. Like whether we like AI or not, Pandora's box been open.
It's one of those
It's
things I wish you could like ask advice from parents on that you're like, nobody really knows how to navigate that at that point. That's a completely new topic. So once again, same thing with ours and our grandparents. They didn't know how to navigate social media. Same situation.
the other thing I am hopeful on is I think with social media, we weren't prepared for it and it went rogue and there were no guardrails because we never really seen software technology negatively impact people. Now we're learning, well, it's actually really bad for kids and teenagers,
Right.
right? I think
Right.
those lessons on AI have people asking questions that weren't asked 15 years ago because of those. So I also hope that people are taking this more seriously because there are negative implications. I don't know, Skynet could happen, but like there's a lot of, in the hands of the bad actors, AI could be really negative for people, right? But I think because of what we saw with social media on the negative side, people are taking it more seriously and asking questions that like I said, weren't being asked a couple decades ago.
Yeah. Well, Kyle, outside of Quipli and the family, what are kind of your hobbies? What are your go-to downtime activities
I like to read.
nowadays?
Give me three things. I like to read. I like to run. Doing my fifth marathon in 5 weeks, Marine Corps marathon. So I like to
Sweet.
slow dad run, sort of stress, unwind and whatever. And I'm also very
Yep.
interested in UFOs. We could do a whole episode on UFOs.
Cool.
I've another book, Imminent. It's the number one best-selling book on the New York Times list right now. Former Pentagon employee, level 15 highest guy, worked on the UFO task force for 12 years. And that is, we'll record this episode, because 5 years from
Yep.
now, that will be maybe even bigger than AI, some of the stuff on UFOs. That's another topic I like to get into, but we
Well,
can.
we don't have to dive into that one too much, but I'm right there with you. That is another kind of deep rabbit hole that I've been finding myself going down a lot as of late, and I feel like it's a really fun one to go down. But also, every person, in my opinion, has a different opinion of what the UFOs are. Right? It's very spiritual to some people. It's very Northrop Grumman real to people. It's a mixture of both to some. So maybe before we get off that topic, we can do another
Yeah.
episode on it for sure.
I,
But
I think it's a mix of both. I think the
okay,
biggest thing is like, the number one best-selling New York Times nonfiction book right now called Imminent is about this topic. The number one most watched 60 Minutes clip of all time was with the same guy, Christopher Mellon, some of these guys, these pilots who've seen this stuff. I think the biggest thing is like, as a country, we should acknowledge that there are unidentified aerial phenomena flying around in our restricted airspace, around our nuclear weapons, around our Air Force pilots every day.
yeah,
And that alone, before we get into like what they are, like that should be like a red flag, right?
yeah.
Like, and senators are starting to come out. They passed a bill last year around UAP disclosure. They talked about reverse engineering, non-human craft, things like that. Um, that alone is like crazy, right? We have the restricted air force because it's either ours and we're like buzzing our own aircraft, which is like not happening. That would be terrible. Or it's Chinese or it's Russian. And in either case, isn't this crazy? Like, why aren't we talking about this? And it is
Right.
coming up more and more. So that's the biggest thing. I have some theories of what they are, but I think I think the first question is like, can we all acknowledge that there are nuts and bolts things flying around that are
Yeah.
100 to 1,000 years more advanced than our current technology, and it's in our airspace? That should be
Well, and I think like 10 years ago, even just 10 years ago, you would have been considered crazy for thinking that UFOs, UAPs were, I mean, were real, right? Thinking there was actually something there. And said nowadays, it's like, okay, well, people seem to start to realize there is something there. Now, what they are, that's once again, that's where you can go down a rabbit hole in that part of the conversation. But as it relates to, them actually being present, it seems very evident that they are present. But maybe just me saying that now on this podcast even seems a bit crazy to some people. But for me, you can see them, that we know they're there. We have plenty of evidence. The government's talked about it plenty. So I guess maybe to talk about your theory a little bit, what is kind of your theory on UFOs in general? You said you had a few, but maybe what's the
I
main
have a
one?
few. I don't know. It's just a very interesting thing to me, because the pilots who see this are saying it's between 100 and 1,000 years advanced of our best F-35. Like that's like a little when like sober pilots who are Air Force Academy graduates who are protecting our country are
Yep,
saying like, I don't know what this is and it freaks me out. And I got eyes on it. And I got 5 different radar systems picking it up, and it's going 80,000 miles an hour from the ocean straight to up to the moon and then back,
yep,
and it's like meeting at the cap point. So like they're talking like there's like an internal, like on every mission the pilot's going to meet at a certain point, and they talk about it privately, and the UFO disappears and then it meets at the cap point. How would it know
right,
that? This is crazy stuff like that. That's like sort of like trolling the pilots.
yeah,
It's just crazy to me. What it is, I don't know. I mean, David Grush went under oath to the U.S. House Intelligence Committee publicly. You can watch the videos under oath, and said, "We have non-human craft in our possession with non-human pilots." And he said
yeah.
that under oath. So he's a crazy or perjured himself. I don't know what that means. I don't know. Are they angels? Are they? demons? Are they future humans? Are they aliens? I have no idea any of that stuff. I just think it's crazy that these things are happening and like most people don't know about it, but it is
Right.
coming up. Like, it was on the Today Show this week. New York Times has put some stuff out about it. Stephen Colbert has brought people on. Obama and Trump have recently talked about it. So it's starting to come out a little bit more, but it's crazy. It's crazy stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I just appreciate you like mentioning it and bringing it up without it being like a crazy topic we can't discuss, right? And there's a lot of people, and I say this still, there are plenty of people that I can't discuss any of these topics with without them being like, Cameron, we don't want to get on this rabbit hole with you. We don't want to have this discussion with you. It's too far. Either it's too much to discuss, maybe it just like blows people's minds and they want to believe in what they believe in, and it just destroys their belief systems, or it's something else. But people, the vast majority of people still don't want to have these conversations.
It is uncomfortable because then you start asking questions of like, are we at the top of the food chain? Like, what does that mean to my faith? What does that mean? Are our borders actually protected? Like it asks a lot of questions that like made me really uncomfortable. But I'm at the point now, I think the truth sets you free. And I'm more just sort of a nerd. I'm like, I don't know what they are. I'm just more interesting because this stuff's crazy. Like whatever they figured out, like we need to reverse engineer it. Whoever
I just love
does,
hearing different people's perspectives on it. It's like that's wild. I would have never considered that. And I recently had this conversation with a friend of mine who is super religious and still very religious, but we started talking about the Nephilim, and how the Nephilim were mentioned and the giants are mentioned in the Bible. And it was something that we never discussed as kids in Bible study growing up, right? And it was never mentioned in a church sermon growing up. Until now, it's like they're actually mentioned, they're actually referenced in the Bible, and people are starting to discuss these things more openly as it relates to like the spiritual and religious aspect of the unknown, right? But what's kind of cool is that we don't know, right? And it's great that we get to keep diving into having these open conversations without thinking that we know everything, because we just don't. We are still very human at the end of the day.
there's a lot of humility in saying I don't know. And I've someone I've spent a lot of time on this, interested in this topic. I actually don't know what it is. I do think there's a nuts and bolts component. I think there's a spiritual component too. I don't know what it is. But it's hard to you got to live your life and not know the answers. I think the longer you go, you realize you don't know most of the answers.
Right. Well, let's plan on doing another podcast to cover that at some point
I
in the
do
future.
UFO deep dive on the Bible. They talk about UFOs in the Bible too. They in Ezekiel they talk about this the circular craft with the wheels coming down, and
Yeah.
I don't know, crazy stuff.
And all the above. So as it relates to Quipli and kind of wrapping things up there, is there anything else you want to add on the Quipli front, that for people that are listening might be helpful for them to better understand, know about you? Where should they go to find, learn more about Quipli and maybe sign up if they are in the rental industry, so on and so forth.
Yeah, number one, my UFO interest is very separate from the Quipli stuff. You don't have a crazy person run the company. They have a separate hobby. You asked about hobbies. Now coming to
Yep.
the workplace, I'm a yeah, we're good here. I think, go to quipli.com, QUIPLI.com. My email is Kyle, KYLE at quipli.com. We work with independent equipment rental companies. So, there's about 10,000. United, Sunbelt, Home Depot are the big ones, but there's a lot of 1 to 10 location independents who just need better software. And that's who we work with. It's a vertical market. We just work with those customers. And because of that, I think we're able to serve them pretty well. So, um, reach out to, Quipli.com, and also don't freak out about my UFO tangent here. I don't want to get canceled or anything.
I don't think we went far enough. I think people are just
We
genuinely
stopped, we
interested.
stopped on the edge. Yeah.
Yeah, we stopped before we got over the edge.
I'm making some
Exactly.
people emailing me like, I don't care about Quipli, but you want to talk about UFOs?
But like you're a UFO guy, so like I'm down. I'll pay for the software.
I
Exactly.
just want to be on the record. I'm telling you, this stuff's gonna come out in 5 years, and I'm gonna send this podcast out to people in 5 years. I told you I was on it. 2024. Called it.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Well, Kyle, I really appreciate you joining tonight. Once again, looking forward to having that next conversation. Maybe we do it 5 years from now, just so you can like put it back in people's faces and say, I told you so,
Yeah.
5 years from now. But once again, really appreciate you hopping on. Always good to connect and talk about life and family and business and all the above. But look forward to staying in touch and keeping these conversations going, not just business related, but also religious, spiritual, and UFO related as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's fun as a fellow podcast host to be the guest this time. So love what you're doing and creating great content. I appreciate you having me on today.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it. We'll talk soon.